My brothers and sisters in the light, there are 5 words that when spoken in the first moments after waking, make it spiritually impossible for poverty to remain in your life. Not difficult for poverty to remain. Impossible. These 5 words create a vibrational frequency that poverty cannot tolerate, a declaration that forces lack to flee from your presence. The Essenes discovered that the first words spoken after sleep carry extraordinary power. The transition from sleep to waking is a threshold moment, a brief window when the spiritual realm is unusually accessible and when declarations carry multiplied authority. What you speak in those first waking moments sets the trajectory for your entire day and, when practiced consistently, for your entire life. For over 200 years, every member of the Essene community spoke these exact 5 words as their first utterance each morning, before getting out of bed, before thinking about the day's tasks, before worry or anxiety could take hold. 5 words spoken in the sacred space between sleep and full waking consciousness. Today I am going to reveal these 5 words to you. I am going to explain why the first moments after waking are so spiritually powerful. I am going to show you the connection between morning declarations and financial reality. And I am going to teach you how to implement this practice starting tomorrow morning. But I must tell you something important first. Most people waste this precious threshold moment. They wake into anxiety, immediately grabbing their phones to check messages that create stress. They wake into complaint, groaning about having to face another day. They wake into negativity, their first thoughts being worries about problems and challenges. They squander the most powerful declaration window of the entire day with garbage thoughts and garbage words. The Essenes would have been horrified by modern morning habits. They understood that the first moments of consciousness are not for scrolling social media or checking email. They are for establishing the spiritual tone that will govern everything that follows. Miss this window and you fight uphill all day. Seize this window with the right words and the day flows with abundance. Jesus practiced this discipline. Every morning, before his feet touched the ground, he spoke declarations that aligned his day with divine provision and protection. The Gospels record him rising early to pray, but what they do not explicitly describe is that his first words upon waking were always the same 5-word declaration that the Essene community had preserved for generations. Let me explain why the first waking moments carry such unusual spiritual power. During sleep, your conscious mind is inactive. Your analytical filters are lowered. Your defenses against spiritual influence, both positive and negative, are reduced. Sleep is a time of vulnerability, but also a time of unusual openness to spiritual reality. When you wake, there is a brief transition period. Your conscious mind is coming back online, but it is not yet fully engaged. Your analytical filters have not yet been raised. Your defenses have not yet been activated. This transition window typically lasts only a few moments, perhaps 30 seconds to 2 minutes for most people. During this window, words and thoughts bypass the normal filtering that your conscious mind provides. They go directly into your spirit. They plant themselves deeply in your subconscious. They establish frequencies that your being will resonate with throughout the day. This is why the Essenes were so careful about the first words of the morning. Speaking negativity in this window plants negativity deep in your spirit. Speaking poverty consciousness in this window establishes poverty frequency for the entire day. Speaking anxiety in this window programs your nervous system for stress before you even begin your activities. But the same principle works in reverse. Speaking abundance in this window plants abundance deep in your spirit. Speaking prosperity consciousness in this window establishes prosperity frequency for the entire day. Speaking peace in this window programs your nervous system for calm before challenges arise. The 5 words I am about to teach you are specifically designed for this threshold moment. They are crafted to establish a frequency that poverty cannot tolerate. When you speak them as your first waking utterance, you are programming your entire day, your entire nervous system, your entire spiritual being for abundance. Before I reveal the 5 words, I need to pause and speak directly to your situation. You just learned that there exists a threshold moment each morning with unusual spiritual power, that the first words spoken after waking carry multiplied authority. that most people waste this window with negativity, anxiety, and consciousness of lack. If you have been waking into worry for years, if your first thoughts each morning are about problems, bills, and challenges, if you have been programming poverty frequency into your spirit before your feet even touch the floor, this is not just a bad habit. This is not merely negative thinking. This is daily programming of your spiritual being for lack. Every morning, in the most powerful declaration window of the day, you have been establishing the frequency of poverty. Then you spend the rest of the day trying to attract abundance while vibrating at the frequency of lack. The contradiction makes prosperity nearly impossible. Think about how many mornings you have experienced in your adult life. Thousands of mornings, each one beginning with a threshold moment of unusual spiritual power, each one an opportunity to establish abundance frequency. How many of those mornings did you seize with the right words? How many did you waste with worry, complaint, and poverty consciousness? The cumulative effect is devastating. Decades of mornings beginning with lack programming. Thousands of opportunities squandered. Your spirit trained day after day after day to resonate with poverty rather than prosperity. And you wonder why abundance has been so elusive despite your efforts? There is a complete morning protocol that transforms every sunrise into a gateway for prosperity. The Essene Wealth Code contains these 5 words along with 20 other practices that will reprogram your entire relationship with abundance. I have taught these 5 words to thousands who had been waking into poverty consciousness their entire adult lives. I have watched people who began speaking these words as their first morning utterance experience financial shifts within weeks. The morning programming works because it reaches depths that daytime efforts cannot reach. If you continue waking without these words, the negative programming continues. Every morning, you reinforce the frequency of lack. Every morning, you make prosperity more difficult. Every morning, you push abundance further away before your day even begins. The link is in the description. The Essene Wealth Code. 21 days to reprogram your mornings and transform your relationship with provision. Click, read. Decide if you want to continue waking into poverty consciousness or finally speak what makes lack impossible. Now let me reveal the 5 words. The 5 words the Essenes spoke each morning were, "Today I receive abundant provision." Say them with me now. Today I receive abundant provision. 5 words, spoken in seconds, but carrying power that echoes throughout your entire day and, when practiced consistently, throughout your entire life. Let me explain why this specific phrase is so powerful and why poverty cannot remain when you speak it. Today establishes the time frame as immediate, not someday, not eventually, not when conditions are right. Today. This word pulls abundance from the abstract future into the concrete present. It declares that provision is not coming at some undefined point, but arriving now, in this day that is beginning. I anchors the declaration in your personal identity, not provision in general, not abundance for the world. 1. You are claiming this reality for yourself specifically. You are positioning yourself as a receiver of what you are declaring. The personal ownership of the statement is essential. Receive establishes your posture as receptive rather than grasping. You are not demanding, you are not taking, you are receiving, which is the proper posture for a creature receiving from the Creator. This word acknowledges that provision comes from outside yourself while positioning you to accept what flows toward you. Abundant rejects the spirit of barely enough that characterizes most people's financial lives. Not just provision, but abundant provision. More than enough, overflow, surplus. This word expands your capacity to receive beyond basic needs into genuine prosperity. Provision encompasses everything you need, not just money, though money is included. Provision covers food, shelter, clothing, resources, opportunities, connections, ideas, energy, everything required for your life and purpose. This comprehensive word opens you to receive abundance in every form it may take. Together, these 5 words create a declaration that poverty cannot coexist with. When you speak "Today I receive abundant provision" as your first waking utterance, you are establishing a frequency that lack cannot tolerate. Poverty must flee because abundance has been declared into the space. The Essenes understood that poverty is not merely a financial condition, it is a spiritual frequency. People can have money and still vibrate at the frequency of poverty, always anxious, always grasping, never at peace. People can have limited resources and vibrate at the frequency of abundance, always trusting, always generous, always at peace. The 5 words shift your frequency. They establish abundance consciousness before the day's challenges can establish lack consciousness. They program prosperity into your spirit at the deepest level during the threshold moment when programming goes deepest. Now let me teach you exactly how to implement this practice. First, prepare the night before. Before sleeping, remind yourself that your first waking words will be the 5-word declaration. Set this intention clearly so that your mind knows what to do upon waking. Second, speak before anything else. When you become conscious in the morning, before opening your eyes fully, before reaching for your phone, before getting out of bed, before thinking about your schedule, speak the words, "Today I receive abundant provision." Third, speak audibly. A whisper is sufficient if others are sleeping nearby, but the words should actually be spoken, not merely thought. The vibration of spoken words carries power that silent thoughts do not carry. Fourth, speak with expectation. Do not recite the words as empty ritual. Speak them as reality. Believe that today, this day that is beginning, you will receive abundant provision. Let the expectation rise in your spirit as you speak. Fifth, remain in the declaration for a moment. After speaking the words, do not immediately rush into activity. Rest in the frequency you have established. Let it sink into your being. Give it time to program your consciousness before the day's inputs begin competing for your attention. The practice takes only seconds but transforms your entire morning and, by extension, your entire day. 5 words spoken in the threshold moment establish abundance frequency before anything else can establish lack frequency. If you are finding value in these ancient secrets, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and tap the notification bell. Every week I reveal another practice from the caves of Qumran that can transform your life. And do something right now. In the comments below, type, "I speak when I wake." When you type this, you are committing to speak these 5 words tomorrow morning as your first utterance. Type it now, "I speak when I wake." Let me tell you about a woman named Elizabeth who learned these 5 words and what happened when she began speaking them as her first waking utterance each morning. Her story shows how decades of poverty programming can be reversed in weeks when you seize the threshold moment. Elizabeth was a school teacher who had struggled financially her entire career. Her salary was modest, as teachers' salaries typically are in most parts of the country. No one goes into teaching to become wealthy, and Elizabeth had accepted this reality when she chose her profession. She loved educating children. She found purpose in watching young minds grow and develop, but the financial sacrifice was real and constant. Her expenses seemed to always exceed her income, requiring constant juggling and occasional debt to bridge the gaps. Every month was a careful calculation of which bills could be paid on time and which would have to wait. Credit cards carried balances she could never quite eliminate. Her savings account remained perpetually small, drained by every unexpected expense that appeared. She had accepted financial limitation as simply the reality of her chosen profession, a sacrifice she made willingly for the privilege of shaping young lives. Other teachers seemed to manage, she told herself. Surely she could too if she just budgeted more carefully, if she just worked a little harder, if she just found a way. Her mornings had followed the same anxious pattern for over 20 years of teaching. The alarm would sound, jarring her from sleep, and immediately her mind would fill with the weight of the day ahead, worry about the day's lessons that never seemed perfectly prepared, stress about difficult students whose behavior she could not seem to reach, dread about the pile of grading waiting on her desk at home, never quite finished no matter how many hours she spent. And underneath all the professional concerns, the constant low-level financial anxiety that formed the background noise of her entire existence. Her first thoughts each morning were almost always negative, though she had never consciously recognized this pattern until much later. How tired she was despite a full night's sleep. How much work awaited her that she would never fully complete. How little money sat in her checking account waiting for the next paycheck. How she would manage the bills that were due before that paycheck arrived. She would lie in bed for a few minutes after the alarm, dreading getting up, her mind already racing with problems and inadequacies before her feet touched the floor. She never reached for gratitude in those morning moments. She never thought about blessings or abundance. Her morning consciousness was entirely consumed by lack, by deficit, by what was missing and what was difficult. This had been her pattern for so long that she could not imagine mornings beginning any other way. She had tried various morning routines over the years, hoping to find something that would shift her experience of the day. Exercise programs that she started enthusiastically and abandoned within weeks when the motivation faded. Meditation apps that promised peace, but that her racing, anxious mind could not settle into. Affirmations that she read from books, speaking positive words that felt hollow and ineffective, like lies she was telling herself that her deeper self refused to believe. Nothing had shifted the fundamental pattern of waking into worry and starting each day from a deficit of peace and hope. When she learned about the threshold moment and the 5 words that make poverty unable to remain, something stirred in her spirit that previous approaches had not touched. The concept that her first waking words carried unusual power resonated with her intuition in a way that generic positivity never had. She had always sensed that mornings mattered, that how she started the day affected everything that followed. Bad mornings seemed to predict bad days. Good mornings, though rare, seemed to make everything easier. But she had never had specific words to speak, a specific declaration to make, specific programming to install in that vulnerable threshold moment. She had never understood why mornings were powerful, only that they were. She decided to try the practice, though she was skeptical after so many failed morning routines had left her cynical about self-improvement approaches. That night before sleeping, as she lay in bed preparing to rest, she reminded herself clearly and deliberately that her first words upon waking would be, "Today I receive abundant provision." She repeated them several times out loud so her mind would remember them upon waking despite the fog of sleep. The next morning, when her alarm sounded with its familiar jarring tone, something different happened. Before the usual rush of worried thoughts could begin their assault on her consciousness, before the parade of problems could start marching through her mind, she remembered the words. With her eyes still closed against the morning light, before reaching for her phone as she usually did to check what crises had appeared overnight, she whispered into the quiet of her bedroom, "Today I receive abundant provision." The words felt strange on her lips, unfamiliar after decades of waking into worry. But they also felt somehow right, somehow true, somehow more real than the anxious thoughts that usually greeted her. She lay still for a moment after speaking, letting the words settle into her consciousness. Then she spoke them again, a little louder with more conviction. "Today I receive abundant provision." Something shifted in her chest. The anxious tightness that usually greeted her each morning, that familiar constriction that made her dread facing the day, was noticeably absent. In its place was something she could only describe as hope, a feeling so unfamiliar in her mornings that she almost did not recognize it. She got out of bed feeling noticeably different than usual. Not transformed overnight into a completely new person, but subtly shifted in a way she could perceive. The day ahead seemed less overwhelming than it usually did. The problems seemed less insurmountable than they had appeared in her pre-alarm dread. She went through her morning routine, shower and breakfast, and preparation for school with an unusual lightness that she did not fully understand. That first day, nothing dramatic happened in her external circumstances. Her classes were the same mix of engaged and difficult students they always were. Her workload was the same mountain of tasks it always was. Her checking account had the same inadequate balance it always had. But internally, she noticed significant differences throughout the day. She was less reactive to stress than usual. A difficult student who usually upset her with his defiance barely registered on her emotional scale. She handled his behavior calmly and effectively rather than with the frustrated tension that usually accompanied such encounters. A last-minute schedule change from the administration that would normally have annoyed and stressed her rolled off without emotional impact. She simply adapted and moved forward. Something about the morning declaration had established a frequency, a vibration, a way of being that the day's challenges could not easily disturb. She had started from a position of abundance rather than deficit, and that starting position had affected everything that followed. She continued the practice the next morning, and the next, and every morning after that, every morning before anything else, before phone or thought or worry, 5 words spoken into the threshold. Today I receive abundant provision. By the end of the first week, the practice had become natural, almost automatic. She no longer needed to remind herself the night before. Upon waking, the words rose automatically to her lips, replacing the old thoughts of dread and anxiety. They had become her new first thought, overwriting the decades-old pattern of starting each day in consciousness of lack. By the end of the second week, external shifts began appearing in ways she had not anticipated. A colleague mentioned casually in the teacher's lounge that she knew several wealthy families looking for high-quality tutoring for their children, families who paid far above normal tutoring rates because they wanted the best for their kids and could afford to pay for it. Elizabeth had never pursued private tutoring before, had never even considered it as a possibility. But now the opportunity seemed to find her without effort on her part. She took on 2 students, meeting with each twice weekly after school. Her monthly income increased by almost $400, money that immediately eased the constant financial pressure she had lived with for so long. By the end of the 3rd week, the school principal called her into his office, and for a moment she feared something was wrong. Instead, he told her about a new position opening up, a curriculum development role that would involve leading other teachers and shaping educational approaches across the school. The position came with a significant pay increase, over $6,000 annually. He had thought of Elizabeth specifically, he said, because of the quality of her work over the years, but also, he added, because of something different about her energy recently. She seemed more confident than he had seen her before, more positive in her interactions, more like someone who should be leading rather than just teaching. He could not quite put his finger on what had changed, but something definitely had. She applied for the position, interviewed with unusual calm and confidence, and was offered the role. Her salary increased substantially. Her status in the school shifted from classroom teacher to curriculum leader. By the end of the first month of speaking the 5 words, Elizabeth's financial situation had improved by over $700 monthly when combining the tutoring income and the salary increase. The tutoring plus the raise had shifted her from constant shortage to comfortable margin. Bills that had been stressful were now manageable without calculation. Debt that had been slowly growing was now steadily shrinking. The financial limitation she had accepted as permanent had begun dissolving as if it had never been inevitable at all. My brothers and sisters in the light, you now have what Elizabeth discovered. 5 words that make poverty unable to remain. Today I receive abundant provision. Speak them tomorrow morning as your first waking utterance. Speak them every morning for the rest of your life. Watch what happens when you stop programming poverty and start programming abundance at the deepest level. If you are ready for complete transformation, the Essene Wealth Code will guide you through this practice and 20 others that will revolutionize your relationship with provision. The link is in the description. Before you leave, type one more time, I speak when I wake. Let this be your commitment to transform your mornings from poverty programming to abundance programming. May the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob meet you at the threshold each morning. May your first words establish abundance. May poverty flee from your presence because it cannot tolerate the frequency you carry. Today I receive abundant provision. Go in peace, go in power, go in prosperity. Until next time, this is Rabbi Enoch, keeper of the scrolls, servant of the light. Shalom.